Hello everyone, and welcome back to Mr. Ravenswick Tales. I know many of you listen to these episodes while drifting off to sleep, so before you settle in, tell me in the comments which part of the world you're listening from tonight. If you've been enjoying the stories, please leave a like and subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. Now, make yourself comfortable, clear your mind, and let tonight's story begin. In this new story. Across Appalachia, mountain cemeteries often stand far from towns, reached by narrow roads that families have used for generations. Caretakers repair leaning stones, clear fallen branches, and prepare graves only after receiving a signed burial permit. But in October 2022, a caretaker in eastern Tennessee found a fresh grave dug inside a section closed since 1936. Beside it stood a headstone carrying his daughter's name, her correct birth date, and a death date scheduled for the following morning. Aaron Bell had maintained Pine Ridge Cemetery outside Coldwater for nearly 19 years. The property covered a wooded slope above an abandoned coal settlement called Black Hollow. His family had cared for the grounds since his grandfather Silas worked there during the 1930s. Aaron's 26-year-old daughter, Emma, was a nurse at the county hospital and planned to leave Tennessee after winter. She often joked that her father knew more about the dead people on the mountain than the living families below it. Shortly after sunrise on October 18, Aaron discovered an iron gate standing open at the northern boundary. That section contained 47 identical markers belonging to bodies moved from Black Hollow after a landslide in 1936. No burials had been permitted there since. Between marker 23 and marker 24, someone had dug a perfect rectangular grave during the night. The clay around it carried no footprints or machinery tracks. At its head was a new granite stone engraved with Emma Bell, October 19, 2022. Sheriff Laura Pike closed the cemetery while deputies searched the woods. Emma answered safely from the hospital and confirmed that she had not visited Pine Ridge. The stone had been cut from granite used by a company that closed in 1958, yet the lettering showed no weathering. Beneath the soil, investigators found an old brass burial token stamped with the number 48. Pine Ridge's transfer map listed only 47 graves. Coal dust clung to its base, although no material from Black Hollow had reached Pine Ridge since the highway project ended. The stone was wet, as if lifted from another grave minutes earlier. That evening, Aaron reviewed the security cameras. At 1:13 a.m., fog covered the access road, and a horse-drawn funeral procession entered through the locked gate. Men in dark coats carried an unpainted coffin toward the northern section, while women followed holding lanterns. Their clothing matched the 1930s, but several faces belonged to people reported missing around Coldwater during later decades. The procession stopped at the new grave, lowered nothing into it, and left the headstone before disappearing into the fog. The camera recorded no hoofbeats or voices. Its audio contained only a shovel striking clay 48 times, followed by a child slowly reading the names carved across the transfer markers. The final figure was a tall undertaker wearing Aaron's grandfather's coat. Silas Bell had vanished in 1936 after supervising the transfer of Black Hollow Cemetery. Officially, he abandoned his family, but his hearse was found beside Pine Ridge with the rear doors open and red clay covering the floor. In the footage, Silas looked directly toward the camera and rang a small handbell once. At the same moment, every motion sensor in the cemetery recorded movement beneath the ground. County archives revealed that the Black Hollow landslide killed 52 residents and buried the original cemetery beneath rock. Road contractors later uncovered 48 coffins while clearing a route through the valley. Silas was ordered to move them to Pine Ridge before the new highway opened. The final report claimed that all bodies had been transferred, yet only 47 markers were installed. A handwritten note stated that Coffin 48 arrived without a name and was placed temporarily inside Pine Ridge's receiving vault. Aaron found the vault behind an overgrown stone chapel. Its steel door had been welded shut for decades, but fresh scratches surrounded the lock. Inside were empty shelves, a wooden bier, and an old burial ledger open to October 1936. 47 entries carried names and grave numbers. The final line listed an unidentified girl, approximately 12 years old, with no assigned plot. Beside it, Silas had written that the county had ordered him to bury another body under her number before inspectors arrived. The replacement was Thomas Vale, an engineer whose blasting crew caused the landslide. Company officials wanted his death hidden from investigators because he had remained in the valley after ordering workers to continue during heavy rain. Silas refused to place Vale beneath the child's number. Before he could report the fraud, both bodies disappeared from the vault along with coffin 48. From that night forward, families near Coldwater occasionally saw a funeral procession climbing Pine Ridge. Someone disappeared each time it arrived, and a new name briefly appeared in the blank line of the transfer ledger. At 11:40 that night, Emma called from the hospital. An elderly patient had given her a brass burial token marked 48 and asked her to return it to the man waiting outside the morgue. Security footage showed no patient entering the room. Minutes later, every elevator opened on the basement level by itself. Emma stepped inside one car after hearing Aaron's voice calling from it. The doors closed, and the elevator reached the lobby empty. At Pine Ridge, the blank ledger line filled with Emma's name. Her headstone changed, adding a burial time of 2:13 a.m. Aaron and Laura returned to the northern section as fog covered the mountain. The open grave was no longer empty. An unpainted coffin rested at the bottom, and someone inside struck the lid 3 times. Before they could reach it, lanterns appeared among the trees, and the funeral procession began climbing from the abandoned Black Hollow Road. Aaron opened the coffin and found Emma alive, but unable to wake. Red clay covered her hospital uniform, and an old silver locket lay in her hand. Inside was a photograph of 2 young girls identified on the back as Ruth and Clara Bell. Ruth was Aaron's grandmother, who had always claimed she survived the landslide alone. Clara, her twin sister, did not appear in any casualty list. Aaron realized the unidentified child in coffin 48 was not nameless. Her identity had been removed so the county could use her burial number to conceal Thomas Vale. Silas stepped from the procession carrying the missing ledger page. He could not speak, but he pointed toward the chapel bell and then toward Emma. Aaron understood that every false burial created an empty place in the cemetery records. The procession had spent 86 years collecting living descendants to fill that place, but none could remain because the grave belonged to Clara Bell. Emma had been chosen because she was the same age Ruth was expected to be when the truth was finally recorded, and because Aaron's position gave him authority to approve the burial. The procession surrounded the grave while the coffin lid began closing by itself. Laura held it open as Aaron ran to the chapel with the locket, ledger, and burial token. He entered Clara Bell's name on line 48, recorded Thomas Vale as an unregistered death connected to the landslide, and assigned Clara the empty plot between markers 23 and 24. The county database rejected the entry until Aaron pressed the 1,936 token into the old paper seal. At 2:12, every grave in the northern section opened several inches. Aaron rang the chapel bell 48 times. With each toll, one member of the procession vanished, and a missing person record changed to show that the person had returned safely years earlier. On the final ring, Silas removed his undertaker's hat and placed the missing ledger page inside Clara's grave. The unpainted coffin became small enough to hold a child, while Emma reappeared beside Laura above the ground. The headstone no longer carried Emma's name. It read, Clara Bell, lost at Black Hollow, found at Pine Ridge. At sunrise, the fog lifted and the procession was gone. Emma remembered stepping into the hospital elevator and waking beneath the cemetery, where a young girl held her hand and asked to be taken home. County records changed before noon. Clara appeared on the 1,936 casualty list, Thomas Vale was named in the landslide investigation, and Silas Bell was recorded as dying while protecting evidence from the road company. His body was found beneath the chapel floor with the handbell resting on his chest. Pine Ridge remained quiet for almost a year. Then, Aaron found another fresh grave near the western fence after a night of heavy rain. The headstone belonged to Sheriff Laura Pike and carried a date 3 days in the future. Inside the chapel ledger, a second unnumbered transfer page had appeared, this one connected to a cemetery removed during construction of an Appalachian reservoir in 1954. At the bottom was a note in Silas's handwriting warning that Clara had never been the only person buried under someone else's name. Caretakers throughout the Appalachian counties now follow an unofficial rule whenever a grave appears without a permit. They check the cemetery's oldest transfer records before filling it and never accept a coffin delivered after midnight without a driver. If the headstone names someone still alive, they leave the grave open and search for the person whose burial was erased. Because some funeral processions are not carrying the dead toward their final resting place. They are looking for a living body to fill a grave that the county falsely claimed was already occupied. In this news story. Across Appalachia, estate auctions are often held inside barns, church halls, and abandoned company stores where families gather to buy tools, furniture, and pieces of local history. Every bidder receives a numbered paddle, every lot is announced, and nothing is legally sold until the auctioneer's gavel falls. But in October 2022, an auctioneer in southwestern Virginia heard a bid from a chair that had been empty all evening. The paddle resting on it carried his daughter's full name and a sale time scheduled for the following morning. When he checked the original register, he learned that the chair had been waiting for someone in his family since 1934. Mason Crow had run Crow Mountain Auctions outside Dry Fork for almost 20 years, selling farm equipment, household estates, and the contents of abandoned businesses scattered through the Blue Ridge foothills. His mother, June, taught him how to trace ownership marks before she vanished in 1996 while cataloging items inside the closed Laurel Creek Company store. Her car remained outside, her coat hung beside the office, and a brass auction bell was found on the floor. Police assumed she had left voluntarily, but Mason never believed she would abandon him without taking the family photographs she carried everywhere. The store was finally scheduled for demolition 26 years later, and county officials asked Mason to auction anything still valuable. He and investigator Ruth Calder cataloged 48 lots, including old tools, cabinets, children's toys, and a walnut dining set covered with 80 years of dust. Behind a false wall, Mason found a 19th century bidder's chair facing the auction table. A white paddle lay across its seat with no number, only the name Clara Crow, Mason's 24-year-old daughter, and the time 2:17 a.m. on the 19th of October 2022. Clara was safely working at a veterinary clinic in Roanoke and had never entered the building. Mason locked the paddle inside his truck, but it reappeared on the chair before he returned. Security footage showed no one touching it. During 11 missing seconds, the camera displayed a crowded auction from another decade, with families in work clothes sitting beneath electric lamps. June stood beside the auction table wearing the same blue coat from the night she vanished. She looked into the lens and raised 2 fingers before the image returned to the empty store. County archives revealed that Laurel Creek had hosted a foreclosure auction on the same date in 1934 after a timber company closed without paying months of wages. Officials seized the contents of 23 workers' homes and told the families they could buy back their possessions with cash before sunrise. Most had only company scrip, which the auctioneer refused to accept. The surviving catalog listed 48 lots, but an unsigned settlement sheet mentioned a 49th lot described as all remaining claims, names, and household interests. 18 families vanished after protesting the sale, and the county claimed they had boarded a freight train for Kentucky. No railroad manifest carried their names, and within a year, photographs, church rolls, and school records began losing every trace that those families had lived in Laurel Creek. Mason found the original register beneath the cashier cage. Several household objects had been sold under the names of their own owners, although those people had never bid, and all the buyer signatures were written by one hand. The final page listed Lot 49 without an object, price, or paddle number. Beneath it was a sentence stating that the auction would remain open until a lawful descendant accepted ownership. At 11:40 that night, the store's disconnected lights came on, folding chairs appeared in rows, and every cataloged object moved into its 1,934 position. A figure in an old auctioneer's coat stepped behind the table and struck the gavel once. Empty chairs began raising numbered paddles, and voices called bids from places where no living person sat. Mason recognized names from unresolved disappearances around Dry Fork. A mechanic missing since 1968 bid on a toolbox, and a woman who vanished in 1981 bid on her mother's china. Each time the gavel fell, the object disappeared and the missing bidder became visible in the chair, unchanged from the day of disappearance. At the same moment, a living relative outside forgot that person had ever existed. The auction was not transferring possessions. It was deciding which version of ownership the county would remember. June appeared inside the clerk's cage, still 43 years old. To her, fewer than 3 months had passed. She had discovered the 1,934 fraud in 1996 and rang the brass bell after the hidden auctioneer called Lot 49. The gavel struck twice before she pulled away the final register page, and because the store's old rules required 3 strikes to close a sale, she had kept it unfinished for 26 years. Demolition would count as removal of the merchandise and trigger the 3rd strike. The white paddle had selected Clara because she was descended from both the clerk who falsified the auction and Lila Ward, one of the workers whose identity had been sold. At 12:26, Clara called from the clinic. Every computer had changed her surname to Ward. Strangers were arriving to collect animals they claimed she had purchased, and a white paddle had appeared beneath her desk. When she tried to leave, the clinic doors opened onto Laurel Creek instead of the parking lot. Ruth watched through a video call as Clara's reflection crossed into the empty bidder's chair while her physical body remained in Roanoke. The store clock advanced toward 2:17, and the auctioneer announced that the lawful descendant had entered the room. June warned that if Clara raised the paddle, every missing family would become a legal interest attached to her name. Mason found notes explaining that the 1,934 auction could be voided before settlement if the true owner of every disputed lot was announced. He began lifting objects and reading initials hidden beneath drawers, handles, and tool heads. Ruth contacted descendants and asked each family to confirm ownership without offering money. Whenever an heir accepted an item, its bid card tore in half and a missing person stepped out of the chair. The building shook as false receipts vanished from the register, but the figure behind the table accelerated the bidding and began using Clara's voice to call higher amounts. Its face shifted between the timber company owner, the county sheriff, and Amos Crow, Mason's great-grandfather, who had served as clerk in 1934. Amos had invented Lot 49 after the seized furniture brought too little money to balance the company books. By listing the workers themselves as remaining claims, he allowed the corporation to own their unpaid wages, homes, legal names, and even the evidence that they had disappeared. June had been trapped because she tried to remove the page without first returning the possessions. Now, the auction had only 1 lot left, and the white paddle on Clara's chair had risen halfway into the air. The final item was a cedar document box that had never appeared in the public catalog. Inside were birth records, marriage licenses, wage slips, and family photographs belonging to all 18 erased households. The box also contained the photograph June carried in 1996, but the image now showed Clara sitting alone among dozens of empty chairs. Mason could not name one owner because the box belonged to every family. Instead, he announced that it had never been company property and could not lawfully enter the sale. Ruth calculated from the wage statements that Laurel Creek owed the workers far more than the auction had collected, making the company the debtor rather than the seller. Mason declared every seizure void and struck the gavel once while calling no sale. The hidden auctioneer raised its own gavel for the third blow. Before it landed, June threw the brass bell onto the table. Its base broke open, revealing the original settlement receipt signed by the timber company owner, admitting that all company assets had already been transferred out of Virginia before the auction began. There had been no lawful seller, no valid auctioneer, and no legal Lot 49. Ruth photographed the receipt and filed it with the county clerk, while Mason stamped void across every page of the register. The third strike landed without making a sound. Every paddle fell, and the hidden auctioneer split into strips of receipts and company scrip. The sales floor filled with the 18 Laurel Creek families and people collected during later auctions. Some were children, while others wore work clothes from decades. Mason remembered only from photographs. Doorways opened onto the years from which they had vanished, and most crossed back into their own time. June remained because Ruth had already reopened her 1,996 disappearance, allowing her to leave through the modern front entrance with Mason. Clara woke inside the clinic with the white paddle across her lap and her surname restored. At Laurel Creek, Mason and Ruth were found with June and 11 missing residents whose original years could no longer receive them because their families had died or moved away. None had aged. County records restored the 18 households, exposed the fraudulent foreclosure, and identified Amos Crow as the clerk who converted people into property to balance the books. The company store was demolished, but the bidder's chair and register were preserved inside a locked evidence warehouse. 6 months later, a blank paddle appeared on the chair after another Appalachian estate auction was advertised online. The name belonged to a living woman whose childhood home had been sold for unpaid taxes while she was hospitalized. Beneath her name was no price, only the words, "remaining interest." Mason canceled the sale before anyone registered to bid, but the paddle did not disappear. That night, a voice from the empty warehouse offered $1 for everything the woman had ever owned, including her name. Auctioneers throughout Appalachia now follow an unofficial rule whenever an estate contains a chair facing the wrong direction or a paddle with a name instead of a number. They verify that the seller truly owned every lot and never call a bid from an empty seat. If an old register includes people under property, debt, or remaining claims, the sale is stopped before the gavel falls 3 times, because some auctions do not sell the belongings of families who are gone. They sell the proof that those families were ever there, and the final bidder may become responsible for everyone the county allowed someone else to own. In this new story. In the Appalachian Mountains, some families still follow an old custom known as telling the bees. Whenever a beekeeper dies, someone approaches each hive, knocks 3 times, and tells the colony what happened. The hives are covered with black cloth, and the bees are asked to accept a new keeper. Most people consider it harmless folklore. But in October 2022, a beekeeper in western North Carolina opened a hive that had been sealed inside an abandoned farmhouse for 70 years. Beneath it were 37 jars of black honey labeled with the names of missing people. The newest jar carried his daughter's name and a date scheduled for the following morning. Jonas Whitaker inspected commercial apiaries throughout the mountain counties surrounding Wren Hollow. He removed dangerous colonies from houses, tested hives for disease, and helped aging farmers preserve bee lines passed through their families. His 23-year-old daughter, Mara, worked at a veterinary clinic in Asheville and planned to move west after winter. Jonas had raised her alone since his wife died, and he called her every evening, no matter how busy either of them became. The only unexplained absence in his family involved a girl named Lydia, whose name appeared in an old photograph from Jonas's childhood, even though neither he nor his parents had ever remembered knowing her. The inspection request came from a county property officer preparing an abandoned farm for demolition. The land had belonged to Agnes Bell, a beekeeper who disappeared in 1952 after a church supper sickened several families in Wren Hollow. Although Agnes's house had stood empty for decades, workers reported bees entering through a crack beneath the kitchen roof. The temperature was near freezing, and every wild colony in the area should have been clustered deep inside its hive. Instead, thousands of bees were flying around the farmhouse as though it were midsummer. None landed on the workers, but they repeatedly struck the windows whenever anyone approached the kitchen. Jonas entered with county investigator Ruth Calder and found a hive built between the interior wall and an old brick chimney. The comb filled a space nearly 12 feet high and continued beneath the floorboards. It contained no ordinary golden honey. Every open cell held a liquid so dark it reflected the room like black glass. Beneath the hive, hidden inside a narrow root cellar, stood rows of sealed jars covered with dust. Each carried a handwritten paper label containing a name, a disappearance date, and the words "not yet told." Ruth recognized several names from unresolved county cases. A schoolteacher who vanished in 1963 had a full jar near the cellar entrance. A farmer missing since 1979 had another. Later, jars belonged to a child lost during a county fair, a nurse who disappeared from a mountain clinic, and two brothers whose truck was found beside an empty logging road. The final jar contained only a shallow layer of honey. Its label read Mara Whitaker, the 19th of October, 2022. Beside it stood a completely full jar labeled Lydia Whitaker, the 7th of June, 1987. Jonas removed the lid from Lydia's jar. The smell reminded him of wood smoke, summer rain, and the soap his mother used when he was a child. When a drop touched his finger, a memory returned with such force that he nearly fell. Lydia had been his older sister. She had braided Mara's mother's hair, slept in the bedroom across from his, and taken Jonas to the river whenever their parents argued. He remembered her leaving home at 16 after saying she had discovered what their grandfather had done in Wren Hollow. Then the memory ended, and Jonas realized his family had spent 35 years without noticing that an entire daughter had disappeared from their lives. Laboratory testing showed that the jars contained ordinary mountain honey mixed with human proteins, traces of funeral cosmetics, and pollen from plants growing near homes connected to the missing people. Lydia's jar contained her DNA. More disturbing, photographs changed after Jonas tasted the honey. A family picture that had once shown him alone beside his parents now included Lydia with one hand on his shoulder. School records listed her enrollment, and an old newspaper mentioned her disappearance. Yet when Jonas called his mother, she insisted she had given birth to only one child until he described the taste of the honey. Then she began screaming Lydia's name as forgotten memories returned. The earliest labels led Ruth to a sealed county health report from August 1952. 38 people had attended a supper at Wren Hollow Baptist Church after helping harvest apples from a nearby commercial orchard. Before dawn, 17 became violently ill. The orchard company had recently sprayed its trees with an experimental pesticide, and contaminated fruit had been used in several dishes. County doctor Samuel Whitaker, Jonas's grandfather, knew the poison came from the orchard, but reported the victims as having left the county during a polio scare. The company paid officials to avoid an investigation, and the dead were buried without markers in a wooded section of Agnes Bell's farm. Agnes had prepared the church's honey cakes, but had not attended the meal. Her diary stated that she watched county trucks carry the bodies to her property after midnight. She wrote down every victim's name and performed the old telling ritual at her hives because their families had been ordered to remain silent. The following morning, her bees began producing black honey. Anyone who tasted it remembered the buried victims, even after official documents were changed. Samuel Whitaker ordered Agnes to destroy the colonies, but she refused and warned that bees remember every death. A household is too ashamed to speak aloud. Agnes disappeared 3 days later. The county claimed she had moved to Tennessee, while Samuel purchased the farm through another family and sealed the hive behind the kitchen wall. His private medical journal revealed that he continued visiting the property whenever someone vanished without a truthful funeral, death certificate, or public explanation. Each time, a new jar appeared in the cellar. Samuel eventually discovered that the honey did not merely preserve memories. As a jar filled, everyone who knew the named person slowly forgot them. When the jar reached the lid, the missing person's identity belonged completely to the hive. Jonas's father inherited the secret but refused to continue tending the bees. In 1987, Lydia found Samuel's journal and entered the farmhouse alone. Her final diary page stated that she intended to open every jar and return the memories to the families. Instead, she broke one on the cellar floor. The black honey spread beneath the house, and the hive produced a new empty jar carrying Lydia's name. Within days, her parents forgot they had a daughter, her classmates stopped recognizing her photograph, and the sheriff closed the missing person investigation because no relative could remember filing it. That night, Mara called Jonas from the veterinary clinic. Her supervisor had asked why a stranger was working behind the reception desk. Her employee photograph had disappeared from the staff board, and her name no longer opened the clinic computer. While speaking, Jonas briefly forgot who was on the telephone. He recovered only after touching Mara's jar. The honey inside had risen halfway toward the lid, and a swarm outside the farmhouse began moving west toward the road connecting Wren Hollow to Asheville. Jonas ordered Mara to remain inside the clinic, but she reported hearing bees striking every window. Minutes later, security cameras showed her leaving through the rear door, while thousands of insects moved around her in the shape of a human silhouette. Mara walked without shoes or a coat, following a route toward Wren Hollow. Deputies attempted to stop her vehicle, but each officer forgot why they had been dispatched as soon as she passed. Ruth wrote Mara's name across her arm so she would remember whom they were trying to save. The ink began fading before they reached the farmhouse. Behind the root cellar, Jonas found a second chamber concealed by stacked honey boxes. 17 skeletons lay side by side beneath black burial cloths. Personal objects identified the victims from the 1,952 supper. An 18th body rested apart from the others with a beekeeper's veil folded across its chest. A corroded name pin-read Agnes Bell. Samuel had killed Agnes after she refused to destroy the hive, then erased her from the same report as the poisoned families. No one had ever told the bees that their keeper was dead. Agnes's final instructions had been written inside the wooden lid of her hive. A colony left without being told of its keeper's death would search for someone who had been forgotten in the same household. That person would become the next keeper, although no family or record would remember where they went. Every later jar had been created because the untended colony was collecting unnamed losses and storing them as honey. Lydia had not been killed when her jar filled. She had been taken somewhere beyond the farm to care for the bees until another forgotten person replaced her. Mara's unfinished jar meant the colony was preparing that exchange. The instructions warned that opening or destroying the jars would release memories without releasing the names. The result would be hundreds of people remembering faces they could not identify, while the hive immediately selected replacements. To end the cycle, every missing person had to be named before witnesses, their true fate entered into a public record, and Agnes's death announced to the colony before sunrise. Only then could the bees recognize that their first keeper had died and accept that no living replacement was required. Ruth reopened the 1,952 investigation while Jonas carried the jars into the farmhouse yard. Deputies, county employees, reporters, and descendants of the victims gathered as forgotten memories drew them toward Wren Hollow. Some arrived crying without knowing why. Jonas knocked 3 times against the first hive and read the names of the poisoned families, followed by Agnes Bell, Lydia Whitaker, and every person listed on the later jars. Ruth transmitted the names into county records while black cloth was tied around the hive boxes. With each completed entry, one jar turned from black to clear gold. Mara reached the farm minutes before sunrise. Bees covered her clothing from her shoes to her hair, but none stung her. She stepped toward the kitchen wall while her jar filled to its narrowest point. Jonas announced Lydia's disappearance and admitted that his family had protected Samuel's crime for 3 generations. He then told the bees that Agnes Bell was dead, that her body had been found, and that her family no longer required another keeper. The entire swarm rose from Mara at once and entered the sealed hive. A woman emerged from the orchard carrying an old smoker and wearing a veil darkened by age. She was Lydia, now 51 years old. She had aged normally since 1987, but had spent the years tending colonies in abandoned houses across the mountains, unable to remember her family or her own name. When Jonas spoke it, she collapsed beside him as every missing year returned to her memory. Several other people appeared along roads and fields throughout the county that morning, older than when they vanished and confused about why no one had searched for them. Mara's jar emptied seconds before the honey reached the lid. The bees abandoned the farmhouse and formed a dark cloud above Agnes's remains before flying into the surrounding mountains. County records restored the 17 poisoning victims, identified Agnes's murder, and reopened every later disappearance connected to the hive. Jonas's family photographs now included Lydia in every place she had originally stood. His mother remembered both children, although the weight of 35 forgotten years left her unable to speak for several days. The farmhouse was demolished, but Jonas preserved one empty hive as evidence. 6 months later, bees began entering it despite the absence of a queen or comb. A single cell appeared overnight containing black honey and a folded label. The name belonged to a woman recently reported missing from an Appalachian nursing home. Her relatives had already held a funeral using an unidentified body, and no one had publicly admitted the identification might have been wrong. Beekeepers throughout Appalachia now follow an unofficial rule whenever the keeper of a household dies. Before sunset, they knock 3 times on every hive, announce the death by name, and identify the person who will care for the colony next. If black honey appears or a jar carries the name of someone still alive, nobody tastes it alone and nobody breaks the glass, because bees can survive long after people forget who once cared for them. And when a death is hidden, they may preserve the missing name until an entire family is forced to remember, or until one of its living members is taken away to become the next keeper.